All righty, Ms. Robin. The proposed 17-18 operational budget. Thank you again, Harvey.
So I've asked Anela Hano Pompey to join me. Anela's our new budget officer, and I wanted her to have an opportunity to meet you as a board. So please join me in welcoming her to the table.
Welcome.
I have a short presentation, and I'm really looking for your input on the budget. What we have tried to do carefully is to align our proposals to our strategic priorities, financial, service, and operations. You'll see under the financial priorities changes to our investment office to support risk and portfolio management. On the service side, you see additions to the member service centers in terms of staffing. And then on the operational side, you see additional staff to mitigate risk in terms of cybersecurity and compliance, as well as to take our enterprise risk management system down to the next operational level. So in terms of the overall comparison, we're seeing a 2% increase in the budget. That is a net number that reflects increases for salary on the merit and potential bargain side, as well as increases in benefit expense and central costs pro rata. But it also is a net of a reduction in the annual allocation to our pension solution project. So this was planned in the original BCP. The allocation for the prior fiscal year, 16-17, is greater than the allocation for 17-18. So it's not anything but a planned reduction in that allocation. In terms of the detail, you can see the array of the 17-18 budget across the various types of expenditures. The distribution is very similar to distribution in 16-17. There's not a measurable change in that distribution. The actual dollar changes are primarily in salaries and benefits and then the consulting and professional services. So those really offset each other to the net change. In terms of the budget change proposals, we have provided detail on the 3 proposals that we're moving forward to you for consideration at this point. As I said, they really reflect investments, member services in our various service centers, and risk and compliance management. So we're increasing staffing to provide that oversight to meet our operational objectives. Of course. Yes, yes. So this is the detail that's included in the material you have, really presented in a graphical form. It shows the 40 positions and the about $6 million cost. There is one additional position that comes in the pension solution BCP transition from 16-17 to 17-18. What you see in that transition of that budget is that the number of staff increases by 1, and there's a reduction in the allocation for consulting and professional services.
Robin, this is a really nice slide. I mean, it's a nice graphic representation of what the write-up is. Would we have that as a resource on our?
Yeah, it's actually posted in your. This should be in your.
Oh, it's part of our PowerPoint slides.
Correct.
Thank you.
Correct. Should be there. You're not seeing. Oh, sorry, Paul. No, it should have been part of the deck that was presented. Okay, so then you can see, as I highlighted verbally, these are the differences between the budget for this fiscal year and the proposed budget in this first reading for the next fiscal year. You see the changes in the salary and benefits, the general expense, the consulting and professional services. a change in pro rata central administrative services that come up with a net. And these are all rounded. I have all the details if you'd like me to go through any of them, but tried to show you the big picture here that comes up with the overall 2% increase. You see up here something that's an acronym for HRZBB. What that is we went through and did an evaluation of our human resources budget, really on a zero basis. How much do we need to support the organization? And we found that we weren't allocating enough resources to that support based on the increases in positions that we're making in other areas. So we've created a way to allocate our funding to increase that support at this point in time, and then with BCPs going forward, we'll allocate additional resources to human resources as a part of that process. So embedded in each BCP is an additional allocation to HR.
Sure. So can you talk a little? Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about your ZBB process? Were there areas that you found that basically you were now overstaffed because circumstances had changed over the last 10 or 20 years or whenever the time you last looked at this?
So it wasn't an overall view at this point. We're taking it piece by piece. And so what we looked at last year was our human resources area, and what we found both from a comparable perspective and just thinking about what was necessary to support the growth overall is that we were underfunded in human resources. And so we have done some reallocation in the current budget to support additions in that area.
Right. And so I was sort of even just within HR, can you talk about what areas you found have changed since the last time you built your budget to that were no longer priorities that you're able to redirect from?
So I don't have those specifics in front of me, Michael, but my recollection is that we found that we were not adequately funding ongoing training and development for our staff. We didn't have enough resources in terms of transactions. So those were areas. I don't remember finding anything in particular where we had over allocated. Melissa, am I missing something? Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
Melissa's our head of human resources here.
Hi. No, I think you
Yeah.
captured it. A lot of the efforts that we're initiating on going forward too were in addition to, and the funding that was not there in place, I think, was also not addressing what that gap would be.
So it was a tough comparison to make just because human resource organizations are structured differently, both from a budgetary and an organizational perspective, and we tried to create alignment, and that's where I'm recalling the differences that we saw was in that ongoing training and development area, as well as the transaction processing, whether it's processing a request for personal action or recruiting or actually dealing with payroll entry, those kinds of things, changes in benefit status. So did that. And then in terms of this year, we have made a commitment to look at our facilities area and make sure that as we have increased our various sites across the state, that we have adequate resources both in those sites and at headquarters to ensure the safety of staff, to manage the operational performance of those facilities effectively, to make sure that the landlord isn't overcharging us for our share of building costs through the leasing provisions, those kinds of things. And so we want to take a look at that area as well. And again, upcoming areas where I can see us taking this kind of approach. I mean, we definitely have started conversations with the general counsel's office about how we use external attorney support versus internal attorney support, what we can do to create effectiveness internally to perhaps mitigate some of the external costs that we're incurring at this point. So again, trying to move through those areas where we feel pressure and make sure that we've got those adequately staffed, as well as changes as a result of changes in the program dynamics, which tend to be the focus as we go through the budget process.
So you're not envisioning it at this point of kind of over a 4 or 5 year period hitting the entire,
Well, I think, we
system.
did some research on this, and we found that people that tried to do a wholesale effort really didn't make progress. I mean, I expected to have a wholesale approach, and as we used our resources to investigate how people had successfully done this kind of analysis, we found that wholesale approach just didn't generate effective results. And we are finding, just based on our experiment of one, that taking it a piece at a time has led to good conversations and our ability to realign resources or to project ongoing needs that we can assimilate as an organization. And again, I think we do it proactively on the program side based on changes in need and numbers. It's harder to do in the back office arena. And so and we are prioritizing based on the stress points.
No, I'm not at all disagreeing with the notion
no,
of carving it up, but
Right.
I do think when you sort of say, well, you proactively hit certain areas, I'm assuming you are doing the same as everyone else does, that you end up looking very incrementally at those areas and you don't step back and kind of do a wholesale review of the areas. That's the benefit of zero-based budgeting in my mind, that it's a
Right.
once in a generation kind of opportunity to rethink.
Right, so
how
we
you're
are trying to
structured.
look at the areas holistically. What we found in trying to contact people and do research on the maybe wholesale back office process was that it became an exercise that didn't generate the results people were looking at because it was too daunting to go through and effectively accomplish. I mean, that's really led to this more incremental approach. Not to say that we won't get through the entire organization, but we really want to approach it from where the stress points are, whether they're increases or decreases or reallocation of money, which is really, what I think we found. So I don't have a 5-year plan for you, but I do have, this is what we did last year, this is what we're planning to do this year, and this is what I can see doing next based on the things that have come up in our discussion about program needs. Certainly something we can look at is putting together an overarching approach.
Just a quick question, looking forward, what rate of growth do you see in this budget? Is it 1%, 2%?
This is a 2% increase overall.
Yeah.
I would say that's masked by the decrease in the pension solution
Right,
annual appropriations. So if you look at it overall, most of our costs in this budget are staff.
right.
So if you look at what we expect bargaining to do over the course of the renegotiation of the MOUs, we've included an anticipated 3% change, as well as our ongoing merit salary increases for people who are not at the top of the range. And then the other changes on the personnel side really relate to pricing rates that are set by others. So in terms of, we're sharing in our proportionate share of the benefit costs and the retirement costs of the state of California personnel.
Right.
So those are the primary drivers for things that are not called out as either budget change proposals or as this reduction in the allocation of the annual amount set aside for the pension solution project this year.
Got it. I mean, I was actually more saying, skip this year, think of the year after and the year after that. Are we
Well,
thinking
some of that
it's
is
gonna grow
yeah.
faster than the portfolio, slower than the portfolio?
So we are looking at this not only from a budgetary perspective, but from a space analysis perspective. And so
Right.
we've been looking at our growth rate and what we think that will be in those drivers of cost from a staffing perspective. The numbers range between 2.5% and 4.5%.
Right.
I think historically we've seen the 4.5%.
Right.
So the question becomes, is that slope going to be stable or is it going to accelerate or decelerate? So it is something we're looking at. Like I said, some of our cost changes are really driven externally to to ourselves, so it's a matter of how many people do we think we're gonna add and how much is it gonna cost to support those. We definitely incorporate the investment 10-year plan in here. We are not seeing significant increases in the membership dynamics, which would be the other program component that would impact our numbers, except that we are consistently looking at our service delivery model and is it the right model? And so if the model changes, does that change in the dynamics of staff? I can certainly see a shift as the pension solution is implemented, or the potential for a shift as the pension solution is implemented, and we assimilate that new business model, as Jack introduced Jeff. I mean, I think there will be a new business model. And so the question becomes, as we get closer to the point of implementation and assimilation, what does that do to where the people, we need people, and how many will it take? I can see increases in technology staff,
Right.
perhaps, and changes in the service delivery staff. So I don't know that I did a good job of answering your question, but those are the levers. Levers I see going up. Did I miss anything? You guys tell me.
Yeah, and one of the metrics you look at in budgeting is whether basically staff cost is rising faster than your asset base, faster than your income level.
Correct.
And I think what you articulated says it's going to stay roughly
Yeah, and the
flat with
metric
those
that
growth
we've put in
rates.
our business plan is the cost per member. So we look at it from a customer perspective as well as a cost based on assets under management. So both things. And the business plan really has us trying to keep that cost per member stable, given the period of transformation that we're going through. We'll see how we do. I think that's a stretch goal.
Thank you. So, I like the page TRB 59, which shows which expenses are included in the budget and which are not. And a budget is often is really used as a tool, right? A tool to make decisions and to figure out how to do a better job and be more efficient. And so benefit payments, they are what they are. That really shouldn't be in the budget because we don't really, that's it. That's what we have to do. But I'm interested in the external investment fees, because I don't think there is a budget for them, right? There's no separate budget for them, or is there?
We do have a control provision, and you'll see that on TRB 54, we do try and anticipate what those are in conjunction with the plan for assets under management, as well as the approach to internal versus external management. So in conjunction with the 10-year plan that Chris presents to you in the investment committee, we work with that data and investment staff to come up with estimates, and we do implement controls around those numbers in our systems. So our ability to predict that is also dependent on our ability to predict market performance, which we know we're not going to do that perfectly, but we do have levers in our system to warn us if something is significantly deviating from expectations, so that we could, in fact, it's part of our control structure. And every year we do write documents that project the amounts that we're going to pay to particular external managers. And again, those are control documents. This is not asking you for a decision on this, so I understand where you're going. It's different, but I do want to give you assurance that we are tracking to those same planning numbers that the CIO is presenting to you, and that we do implement within our systems controls around those numbers so that we could see if something was significantly different.
So thank you for pointing me to TRB 54. So the external investment expense goes from 365 million
To 400.
to 400, which is a 9.6% increase in 1 year.
Yeah, and that's really based on the difference in what we projected in terms of assets under management. Again, this is 2 years out, so we're working on that growth pattern that was in the 10-year plan. So Again,
So-
this is stepping
So
up
we were thinking that assets under management were gonna go up by almost 10%,
over the course of that period of time, yes.
that 1 year period of time.
Right, so again,
And how did we come to that? I mean, even if we have we know we're cash flow negative.
Yes, we
and-
are,
And we have
yeah.
a 7.5% investment return assumption, so how would our assets under management go up by 9.5%?
thanks, Chris.
I just want, Chris Alman, for the record in the audience, you guys know who I am. So I'll just correct what Robin said, the assets under management grow by 7.5. They just assume the long-term rate. What we're factoring in out there in that year is that we know some of the programs we're doing are gonna incur a higher cost. And we're also trying to estimate we have a lot of managers on performance fees, so we're trying to build in a potential of a performance fee, but we don't know. So because that budget's in the continuously appropriated budget, we know we're not having to set a hard number for the state. It's just kind of an estimation that we use for programming and measurement. So that's how you get the 9% jump in 1 year, is the growth in assets, but then the appraisal cost of performance fees.
I guess I have a couple thoughts. First of all, I mean, I sort of think they should be side by side, what our internal costs and our external costs are. And the reason is because we talk sometimes about, we want to move more assets internally. I think if we see those numbers side by side, I mean, it becomes a more compelling case.
It's 10 to 1.
Yeah,
I've done it, we do
Right.
that in our cost report, it's 10 to 1
Right.
ratio.
Which is what our budgeting process should be about. And in addition to which, we have talked about a focus on measuring costs and reducing costs. So, I mean, if the growth is because, if the growth is 9.5% because we have to pay performance fees, well, then that's probably money well spent. But if it's not, I mean, it would be interesting to kind of see what's performance fees and what's assuming we didn't have to pay performance fees, what is the base? I don't know, that my feeling would be it would be very, very useful in a budgeting sense to see them both, because that makes us more knowledgeable and
We can pull out,
more
because we do a
accountable.
10-year forecast in the investment business plan, and that does include external management fees and all, it breaks out everything. We can include that in Robin's charts, so you can see not only what a 2-year period, but what the longer term projection of costs will be.
Well, and then
the
we can
basis
also
for that.
compare that to what we
Right.
see as the internal and then the total overall.
Because what you care about is in that plan, I'm assuming the implementation of things like inflation-sensitive RMS.
Right, no.
We're making assumptions about the cost factors.
Sure.
And so really trying to project actual real-life experience for
Yeah,
us.
but I mean, even if we earn 7.5%, I don't think our assets grow by 7.5%, right? Because otherwise, we're cash flow negative.
I was just
So-
throwing out the number. No, the 10-year plan that Robin's referencing that she uses has the actuary's negative cash flows in it.
Yeah,
It's got the DBS and the cash balance, but no, obviously none of the pension too, and it
Yeah.
does factor in the flows on those.
okay.
Right, and there's also the provision of the income and dividends that come into those numbers as well. So there's a fairly significant investment income number that's thrown in there.
Right,
That's not the
right,
gain or
okay.
loss,
Yeah,
but
got it,
the
got
actual
it. So
realization of,
our asset value is not
Right.
the actual,
right.
got it, okay, but thank you.
And just a clarification, because I think it's the cost that Paul's most concerned with. Am I correct in understanding those numbers do not include the fees paid by partnerships in which we invest?
The numbers do not at present include the carried interest or the management fee. Now that we'll capture the indirect costs, we can easily, we know through the CEM report, the estimation of those. Now we'll know the actual. We could include those too if you want.
I mean, that's the big thing about
They're,
internal
yeah,
business.
they're netted out, so from a budgetary standpoint, I'm always trying to be clear on the continuously appropriated budget. From the budgetary standpoint, the controller doesn't ever have to cut a check.
Right.
But we'll be capturing those kind of on the cost estimation. There's that subtle difference of us coming back to the investment committee with a cost report versus the hard budget numbers we need for the state and the controller.
Robin, go ahead.
That was the end of my presentation. I was really here to get any input, which we've received in terms of things that you think we should be addressing that we haven't, or things that we've brought forward that are perhaps not as seen from your view as the priorities that we've presented. So really looking for your input. This is the opportunity. We put a proposal forward, and to the extent that you have additions or adjustments, we look to get those from you, and we'll be back in November seeking your approval and resolution so that we can move this forward to the governor's budget in December.
Harry?
Robin, this might be a little bit too granular for the conversation, but I'll err on maybe it is, and so what, as opposed to not asking. The priority or the focus and the importance around cyber issues that we've, without getting into some of the conversations we have in private, does the budget and staff thinking about what the needs may be for the organization going forward for an issue that will probably have increased visibility and concern for organizations like ours?
So I'll give you my view and then ask Brian to provide additional color to the extent that I'm not addressing it sufficiently. There is a budget change proposal that includes 5 additional staff for the Information Security Office. We're also embarking on an assessment of our cybersecurity. So I would like to share with you that there is a potential that based on the results of that assessment, we'll find that we need additional resources. The ask this time not only includes those 5 staff, but also additional money for education and training for the staff that we have to keep current. So that's what's in there.
Assessment that we expect to be completed before the end of the year. The asks in here are, without going into the closed session, are directly related to your maturity report. And so they are specifically identified to engage in or increase functions that have been identified in the reporting to the board.
Thank you.
All right, Robin, that's it. Just for the board, I'd like to try to get through our open session, take a break before we go into closed. Plow on. You guys good with that? All right. Robin?
Okay, so.
System risk management.
Right.
I was so glad you came up today.
That was great.
On there, and I said, we are good. Thank you,
I don't have any kind of presentation. I guess the things that I want to point out is that we did go through a robust risk assessments meeting at the onsite of the fiscal year, making sure that we looked at both internal and external factors. What we tried to do on the heat map that is on TRB, 74, is to show you that we increased the probability of a couple of risks, one related to pressure on contribution rates in terms of meeting our full funding goal, and the other reflective in terms of financial reporting and the implementation of a fairly significant new standard this year, GASB 72, which has us look at the disclosures for the fair value of investments. And so those changes were as a result of the robust conversation. What we've presented to you here, in addition to the heat map, is our dashboard on those 10 major risk categories and the sub-risks that support them. We, as I indicated in the budget presentation, we are beginning to migrate this approach down through the organization to match what has been coming up through the program areas. So we are seeing that ability to have the underlying risk and control assessment inform the enterprise risk, as well as the enterprise risk inform that more detailed program risk and control assessment, making progress in that. We also will be focusing this year on additional training for staff, so that's part of our business plan, is to make sure that we keep risk management and controls in front of people, helping them understand. I think this is something that, you know, we are learning as an organization, that internal controls don't necessarily make things more efficient. They make them more effective. And they are time consuming in terms of the adherence to policy and testing against that adherence to policy, as you heard in those of you who are in the ARM committee on the internal audit results. So that's all I had. I in particular had to say, and we're all here to answer any questions that you might have.
Paul?
Yeah, just a quick thing. You know, looking at risk category number 1, pension funding and investment. Reading through that, I noticed that we're not talking about downside risk, which is really where I think, in terms of the investment committee work that we've done and the asset allocation and the implementation of RMS, we've had a focus on downside risk, but that's not really reflected in the description here. So I just would throw that out for consideration in your dashboard.
All right, anybody else? Thank you, Robin. Hi, Graham. Hi, John. Graham, you're going up first?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Graham
afternoon.
Fenley with Grant Thornton, here to present our regular independent oversight report on the pension solution and data preparation projects. So turning to pension solution, here you go. Start off by a little update around status. You may remember when I spoke to you in June. At that point, phase 2, the requirements confirmation and conceptual design phase, was not yet complete. It was delayed. That phase now is effectively complete. It's waiting one activity milestone report, which is a final closeout document, but otherwise phase 2 is complete. Phase 3, which is the infrastructure track of work, is proceeding on track. The majority of work that's happening right now is around phase 4, which is the functional rollout. So release 1 work is ongoing, and in fact the design activities around release 1 are close to complete. The concern that we'd raised in June was around the deliverable review process, both in terms of its productivity as well as the quality of some of the deliverables. I'm happy to note that there has been an improvement observed over the summer in that area. I think we'd attribute that partially to process improvements, but also to the filling of 2 quality manager roles, one on the CalSTRS side and one on the Team CGI side. We are going to be monitoring the sustainability of those improvements, though. We noted, for example, that the results in August weren't quite as good as they were in July. So we want to keep an eye on that to make sure that those improvements are sustainable for the rest of phase 4. A major focus of the project in July and August has been putting together a schedule for the implementation of functional release 1 that goes all the way through that implementation date. CGI delivered a draft of that schedule in July. There were a number of concerns shared by ourselves, IV&V, the CalSTRS project team around that schedule. The specific concerns that we had, I would say, fell into 2 different categories. One was around over-allocation of resources on the CalSTRS side, and by that we mean that the schedule was assuming that individuals would be basically performing more than a full day's work on certain days, weeks, or even months, and therefore that it was sort of an unrealistic expectation was being put into the schedule of how much could really be done. And the second category was there were some additional streams of work that we felt were not reflected in the schedule, but that could have an impact on the dates, such as some of the activities going on in the data preparation project. So the project has been working very closely with CGI over the last 6 to 8 weeks on a detailed review of the schedule, and we've been reviewing those conversations as they've been happening, with the intent of agreeing on a schedule that is realistic and achievable, and gives an implementation date for functional release 1 that everybody can have confidence in. Currently, our expectation is that agreement should happen sometime in October. So that's our update on pension solution progress. Any questions? Okay, so the only thing I would say on data preparation, I have one slide here, but I'll keep it very short. Data preparation is basically on track. The major activities are actually about dealing with dependencies with pension solution in terms of what kind of tasks are shared, what is the scope, like what is data preparation going to do, what is pension solution going to do, and how do the two projects interrelate. And we feel those conversations have been happening quite productively to this point. So at that point, if there's no additional questions, I'll turn it over to John.
I don't have anybody in the list.
Thank you, Graham. So I should have slides as well. Before I start, my name is John Lemlin. I'm with Maximus. We're your IV&V vendor, the independent review, very, very similar to some other work that Graham just discussed. Last time we met, was in June, and one of the asks that I had from the committee was to perhaps show some of our observations, some of our risks and recommendations in a better context. So I've added a slide, the first slide to actually present that. So this is a very high-level kind of dashboard for the project from the IV&V perspective. The first thing I'll obviously call your attention to is there's a lot of yellow. And this, I think, is indicative of the fact that it's a well-known fact, I think, that this project is relatively risky. This is a large systems integration project. It's comprehensive. It's core to your mission. I mean, I think it's well recognized, and I think the project is acting accordingly. But this does show you a bit of our history over the last 5 reviews. The rows, each of the rows are the different IV&V review areas that we are looking at. Within each one of those, there's sub areas, and there's 153, I think, altogether, different items that we look at and we score red, yellow, green in our work. So this is one view I was asked to present, and it gives you a little bit more information from a perspective. In addition to lot of yellow, I'll call your attention to the 2 other things that jumped out at me when I looked at this. The first is quality management, and I'll talk about that a little bit when I go through the results from the July review. But basically, a long red line just means it's been a high risk for a while. Doesn't mean people are ignoring it. And in fact, this is a good example where the project's working very hard, as Graham mentioned, in some areas. But I'm a tough grader, like I told you last time, and I'm not going to give them, I'm not going to let it down to yellow until I'm convinced that there's sufficient progress. The other long red line is a different story. It's software development. That was a high risk area. Again, the project takes our recommendations and findings very seriously. They work very hard, and they've reduced that risk to a level that we believe is back down in the medium range, as opposed to something that's considered high. So with that, I've got 5 areas that I'll just briefly mention that are driving the reds in July. The first 2 are classic large-scale system integration project kinds of issues. Nothing new here. In fact, I covered these last time when we met. It's a large project. Communication is always a risk. Communication is always an issue. I think we met Jeff Zimmer earlier today. He's this business transformation director who's been hired. I'm still a hard grader. I want to see what happens, but it's a very significant move, I think, for the project to hire a new person and give him the assignment of both communication, and you'll see him again under the change management area. So we're very encouraged by that. We'll be watching that closely, but it does demonstrate that as we bring up risks and recommendations, the project takes them very seriously and is taking positive steps, I think, to address them. The other item I'll mention under change management, in addition to that being in Jeff's area, CalSTRS is also procuring a transition management support vendor to come in and bring staff in who are experienced with change management And change management is another classic IT issue in these kinds of projects where it's not just a technology project. It means operations, organizations, it means changes to CalSTRS, to the field, to employers, everybody. So those are two kind of classic areas that we watch and are watching. The next two are quality and then resources. So quality is the item that Graham mentioned earlier. Everyone's concerned about quality. We were all very concerned when we looked at how long deliverables were taking to be reviewed and approved. The project has taken several steps to process and improve the process. According to our notes, they've cut the issue in half. There's about half the problem there was earlier, but again, for them, it's still an issue. It's still something that they're wrestling with. Again, to their credit, one of the biggest mitigation steps that the project has taken is they've hired Forrester. So Forrester is a firm that specializes in quality and quality management, and they're under engagement now with CalSTRS to come in, look at the quality management procedures, look at roles and responsibilities, and give them a roadmap, give CalSTRS a roadmap on how to help address this issue. So I'm still a hard grader. I tell people I don't give credit for effort. I want to see results, but that's a promising and a very obvious step in the right direction. Resources, as Graham mentioned, there was a version 4 of the project plan that came out that was had severe over allocation of resources, not just on full-time resources where people were being expected to work more than 8 hours a day, but the real problem we found is that it was with the part-time resources. So there are a lot of subject matter experts that are being pulled into the project for a limited role for, 4 hours a day or 20 hours a week or something like that. And that's where we found a lot of the issues, is that the person might be available 20 hours a week, but was in the work plan for 30. So it looks like they're still part-time, but when you do the math, they're being given more responsibility in the project than they've been identified as having available. Could mean the schedules, overscheduling them, could be their allocation just needs to be increased or fixed. So we're still trying to figure out the root cause, and working very closely with the project to help address that. This is a credit I'll give Ashish. One of the most important areas of risk management, in my opinion, is strong management and strong executive leadership. And Ashish, I know in that resource area, is very involved with the highest level discussions with Team CGI around a schedule change that would potentially address that issue as well. So those are all good developments. The last area of concern, this is a pretty technical one, so I won't get into the details, but it's around the environments for testing. Testing is a long way off, but in our experience, the environments and the technical infrastructure required for testing environments can take quite a while. It can be expensive. It can mean hardware, software, licensing. There's a lot to it. We haven't seen, even though it's early in the project, we haven't seen the kind of diligence and detail that we expect to see in the testing environment configuration kinds of analysis. So we are raising that as a risk very early to make sure that folks can nail it down and make sure that there's a good plan for the testing and testing environments that are required. System like this, it wouldn't be the first time the project gets too close to testing and finds out they're scrambling. So, but that's a technical environmental thing. So with that, I've tried to touch a few of our high points. There's 5 areas of concern. Graham and I do this all the time, and we always end up talking about the bad stuff. I do want to make sure you know there's a lot of good stuff going on. The project's doing well. They're managing their issues. They're managing the risks. One of the most important things for me is that they take our recommendations seriously. They take our risks seriously. There's a real dedicated effort to the success of the project, both by CalSTRS management and Team CGI's management. And at the end of the day, that's the best risk mitigation of all. So with that, I'll answer any questions.
I'm sorry. I don't have anyone in the list. So I think we're good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. Thank you, John. Right on our consent agenda. The investment committee is a written report. There's actually 2 of them. There's nothing from appeals. Comp and benefits and services are also written. So the only one we have to be with an action for us to vote on is audits and risk management. So Paul, if you want to
So by the direction of the audit.
go ahead and chime in so we can make sure you get on the. There you go.
Good. By direction of the Audits and Risk Management Committee, I move to adopt the amendments to Audit and Risk Management Committee Charter to include provisions addressing the committee's oversight of the development and implementation of the CalSTRS enterprise-wide compliance program.
So Paul has moved that on behalf of the committee. I'd like to go ahead and just vote on that right now. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Any abstentions? Alrighty. We have the new handout for the board member education because that has changed. Yes.
There's one issue I'd like to put on the minutes that's not reflected.
Okay, so, okay. Go ahead, Harry. I'm sorry.
Thanks. In the written materials that we received from the minutes for the compensation committee earlier today, it should be noted that we requested an amendment to the work plan for the year. Oh, there is a revised copy? Okay, I just want to make sure that's reflected in the record. Thank you.
Good job,
Ms.
Harry.
Shamani. Thank you.
On top of that, I didn't read it, so thank you. Alrighty, so we have approval of the minutes, we have new board member education, contracts requiring board approval, that's the rest of the consent. Does anyone want to pull any of those? Paul?
I don't want to, I want to abstain on the minutes approval since I wasn't at that.
Okay, we'll let you, thank you. Okay. So let's go ahead and pull that so you can do that individually. So that the other written reports and the board member education and the contracts, all in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed nay. Any abstentions? Moving on to the minutes, approval of the minutes, all in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed nay. And abstentions. Okay, and Paul has abstained on those. Alrighty. Jennifer, items referred by committee for board decision, we don't have any. So the new business and review of information requests, nothing there. Draft agenda. Do you want to say anything about the draft agenda, Jack? Alrighty. Is there any statements from the public? Alrighty.
Scared them off.
We must have. Alrighty, we're gonna go ahead and take a 10-minute break and come back into closed session. Before we go ahead and go to that break though, I too want to add my thanks to the tech crew for helping us transition the new system. You guys have been great scampering up here and helping us through everything and changing things out when we went to break. So thank you very much. We really appreciate it. And we will be back in closed session in 10. Thank you very much.
Hello.